Welcome to this episode of the Lori Rivers Holistic Podcast, Holistic Healing with Lori. And I wouldn't usually do the podcast right now. I just woke up recently. My hair is all messy. I don't have any makeup on or anything like that. And I'm not wearing my earrings, which I usually wear during my podcast, but this is too important. And I'm so excited about this. And I think that it can be a huge turning point for so many people in your journey towards being completely healed, completely recovered, however you want to think of it, and living your full healthy life. So I'll just give you a little background. If you're not familiar with my story, I had lifelong fibromyalgia. So from ever since I could remember, and it was weather dependent. And it was very confusing to all the doctors that I went to. I don't think I ever got an actual diagnosis of fibromyalgia. And then I did develop severe ME/CFS, so chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis when I was in my 20s and was bedbound for a majority of my 20s. And then I did develop long COVID, but I got through long COVID to the place where, I wasn't experiencing post-exertional malaise anymore. I did that within 8 months because I had been coaching people for 20 plus years at that point about how to manage chronic fatigue syndrome, and a lot of them did get well. But so I used a lot of those I used exactly the same actually principles that I taught. But what I still wasn't able to get past was the fibromyalgia. And I don't know that I realized until I was interviewing a doctor for one of my summits, my long COVID and ME/CFS holistic healing summits. And she said, for people who have chronic conditions and have had them for a long time, it just becomes normalized. You don't think about the possibility of not having the symptoms, or you don't really go after it, right? And I realized that was the case. I had been trying for my whole life, basically, to get better and to figure out what was going on in my body and all those things. Now, when I started what's now called my Heal online program for people with long COVID, with ME/CFS, with fibromyalgia and things like that, I did make a lot of headway because I was addressing some of the root causes, right? So focusing on parasites, and passed a lot of worms, did a lot of work in that area, and I did see some improvements. And then perimenopause came along. So this is over the course of many years here, pretty recently. But perimenopause came along, and my weather-dependent fibromyalgia symptoms came back with a vengeance, and were not only weather-dependent at this point, but also just pervasive. So brain fog, emotional swings all over the place, super fatigued, a lot of pain, and a lot of other symptoms. So I realized that I still hadn't gotten to the root of things. Now, of course, those parasites need to be out of the body. Of course, the terrain of the body needs to be changed, right? Toxins, just detoxification, all these things. And that is a vital part of allowing the body to be able to be its natural, healthy blueprint, which I do believe that we all have. I believe that's how our body functions when it's unimpeded. Anyway, I started doing something called Novage. So if you're familiar, you might be familiar with this. I don't know. And I'd been doing a neti pot every once in a while, but I didn't think that I had any sinus issues because I never had any of those symptoms, right? I never had headaches. I never had a lot of drainage or stuffiness or anything like that. So I was like, yeah, it's not an issue for me. And this is a place that we miss so often, even as practitioners. We miss dental, oral, right? Super important. And that's a whole other subject, but you want to make sure that you are removing any mercury, any amalgams, and making sure that you don't have any infections in the dental, oral area, the jaws, all these things, but also the sinuses. Critters, whether it's mold or bacteria or candida even, they love open spaces, moist open spaces. So we're talking sinuses big time here. Not only that, but when we are exposed to things, we breathe them in, right? Especially mold. Now, I'm not currently living in a moldy environment. I can look back on my life and see several times when I was living in a moldy environment and a damp environment, but I never, for some reason, put two and two together and said, I did finally. And I finally did say, okay, so I think that mold must be a component here, right? Mold illness can masquerade as lots of different things. And not only that, but if you have a certain gene defect, then at which 25% of the population actually has, that's a lot, right? That's 1 in 4 people. Then your body is not able to make the antibodies to take care of mold and mycotoxins in the body, right? So if you're exposed to mold at any point in your life, even if it's in the womb, right? If your mom has mold mycotoxins in the system, even if she doesn't have problems with them, even if her body is able to handle them, they get passed on to you. And if you have this gene defect, then you're actually born with mold illness. Then the next thing that literally blew my mind was, so I started using this twice a day, and because I wanted to make sure that I was covering all my bases. And what I also did was I added some Cellcore products to it, to the Novage. You always want to use saline with this, right? And always want to use distilled water with any kind of nasal rinsing that you do. You want to use distilled water actually for everything. But what happened was, as I was using the Cellcore products, especially Para 3 and one called Carboxy, after a month and a half, I started to get super congested and to feel sinus pressure. I was like, wait a second, this is supposed to actually, what they advertise with the Navage is do this twice a day and all of your nasal stuff will clear up. You won't have headaches anymore. You won't have allergies, all this stuff. And I was like, wait a second, I'm having symptoms that I've never had before as far as the congestion and stuff. And not only that, though, I was getting worse fibromyalgia pain symptoms and worse emotional mental symptoms. And even every once in a while, these times where I couldn't function. Part of what I dealt with growing up and just off and on throughout my life, period, was not being able to take action on things that I wanted to take action on. It's very hard to be a student if that's happening for you, especially if you're missing a lot of school because of weird, unknown symptoms that, or not unknown symptoms, but of unknown origin symptoms, and difficult to run a business, difficult to do anything, difficult to live, right? If you're having all this inability to take action, even aside from post-exertional malaise, right? I wasn't dealing with post-exertional malaise for the majority of my life. So anyway, was dealing with that a lot after I was doing this for the month and a half, and was also just feeling straight up insane for a lot of the time. So I finally went, oh, I think that I must have mold colonization issues in this area. It's getting stirred up. they're dying off and they are kicking back, and they're causing toxins. They're causing neurotoxins. They're affecting my brain, the way that my brain works. Now, the way that mold acts in the body, it can affect every single part of the body. And especially when you're dealing with this area, which most people who have mold illness are dealing with mold in this area, mold actually breaks down the cell walls. It actually damages the tissues of your body. So we're talking about a compromised blood-brain barrier here. And then, of course, this is where your digestive system starts, in truth, is your sinuses actually. So if you're having any kind of from up here, the mold from up here is going to end up in your digestive system and is going to go through the rest of your body. And then it's going to compromise these other areas. So we've got compromised blood-brain barrier. We've got mold getting into the brain, actually, and affecting emotions, affecting brain function, affecting, I would say, even thought patterns. Crazy experiences there, which I'll share with you in just a second. And mold loves the liver as well. And so it's in the liver, breaking things, again, breaking down cell membranes. It's literally damaging the liver and the gallbladder. But the other thing that happens is that so we already are dealing with compromised liver and gallbladder function because of the damage caused by the mold to begin with. But then it's also, the mold is in the bile, and because the liver is compromised, because so many things in the body are now compromised from the mold, the bile with the mold in it is not getting flushed out of the system, right? So you're not pooping it out. It's actually getting recirculated through the body. So we need to make sure, first of all, that we're pooping, always, first of all, that we're pooping regularly, which means at least once a day, preferably twice. If you're not, you need to be taking action towards that. And then secondly, you have to be using what's called a binder. That's going to bind to the mold. It's going to bind to the mycotoxins, to the toxins. The body is going to be a very toxic place. If you have any chronic symptoms, then actually, if you're a human, then you are going to be dealing with toxins in the system. And this is something that you want to be taking care of on a regular basis, is pulling those toxins out. Third, we want to support the liver and the gallbladder so that the body is getting rid of the mold and the toxins. So these are the steps that we take here. And then we also want to be addressing parasites and other pathogens that are larger because they actually have mold inside of them. If you have been exposed to mold, if your immune system did not take care of the mold properly, then these larger parasites actually scoop up the mold, the heavy metals, things like that. So we want to take care of those larger ones. And then we start to look at addressing the mold. So you can start off with, once you have those things in place, then maybe even before that, you can start off with just the regular saline version of using the Navage. And then once you've gotten a ways in your protocol and you've been addressing parasites and you're pooping every day and all that good stuff, then you start to more aggressively go after the mold in the sinuses, and also make sure, of course, that you're not living in a moldy environment. And that's a whole other discussion. This is a big deal. Yeah, I am personally really excited about this, even though it's not always the most comfortable thing to be detoxing from. But I'm excited about it for me personally because this could be the last piece. I thought Lyme was the last piece, but I hadn't addressed, so Lyme and mold often go together in the sinuses too. A lot of people find that when they address mold in the sinuses and possibly something called MARCoNS, that Lyme is automatically taken care of as well. But I'm also excited. We address mold in the HEAL program anyway, but we've never gone deep into the sinuses. And given the way that I responded and have been responding to this, to the sinus work, and for those students that I have who have been plugging away at the parasite cleansing, at the nervous system work, at this other stuff, but there's still this piece that just doesn't seem to be falling into place. This could be the key. You got to make sure to address this too. You got to make sure to take care of the oral stuff. But the sinuses also super, super important, and the mold portion of that. So I'll wrap it up by talking a little bit about some of the things that you might experience as you are treating this. And so there's something called MARCoNS, which sometimes goes along with mold for people in the sinuses. And it's actually a colonization of something called biofilm in the sinuses. And biofilm is another whole other subject that's really fascinating. But yeah, so the sinuses get colonized with this biofilm. And like I said, it's called MARCoNS. There's a test that you can get for it. And they go together a lot of times. And there's actually something called MARCoNS madness, because when people start to break apart the biofilm and to address the mold and all those things, these toxins get released. And again, because of the damage already done to the cells from the mold and the blood-brain barrier and how close we are to the brain here, it can make you feel crazy. So literally, Dr. Shoemaker, he's the one who coined the term chronic inflammatory response syndrome with CIRS, C-I-R-S. I think those are the right words for that acronym, but it's called CIRS, C-I-R-S. And he's done so much work on mold. So anyway, he has this quote, and I'm not going to be able to remember it exactly, but basically when he's talking to doctors that he's teaching or practitioners that he's teaching about how to work with your MARCoNS patients, he basically says, look, some of them are going to be literally out of their mind. They're going to be experiencing lowered inhibitions. They're going to have some crazy thought patterns. So yes, listen to them. And this is not gaslighting. This is literally listen to them and go along with them. But if you start to notice that their thinking patterns are super, super off, that kind of goes along with this. That's when you want to back off, right? You want to back off from treating, take it at half the pace, or give yourself several days. So it's an interesting experience. And I have had some of those times where I felt like I was going insane, and I was like, all right, I got to back off or push through. Coffee enemas are a really super important thing that you can do to support getting these toxins out of the system, and again, keeping the mold from just recirculating through the body, right? So it's supportive on several different levels. That is my super exciting news, and hopefully helpful for any of you who feel like you have done everything you possibly could do. And I'm thinking about one of my students right now who literally is able to take just like massive amounts of the very powerful supplements that we use, and still has some of these symptoms that haven't shifted yet. And she has been to doctor after doctor. She has gone through several rounds of treatment for Lyme. She's actually taken the test for MARCoNS, but weirdly, nobody said we need to address sinus stuff. So I'm super excited for her to see. She knows that she's dealing with mold. She knows that for sure from past exposure. So I'm really excited for her and for you if you have a similar kind of story where you have done everything and there's still things there that haven't shifted for you. Please share this with someone who you think would benefit from it. Just remember, again, 1 in 4 people have this genetic mutation where the body just doesn't deal with mold appropriately or effectively. Either you or somebody that you know is absolutely, several people that you know, are absolutely going to be dealing with these kinds of issues. All right, I will see you next time. Lots of love.